Welcome back, ruminators. Welcome back to another session, Rumination with Andrew. Thank you very much for joining as we are about to discuss a very important topical matter. I want to thank those of you who are subscribing. Remember now that you need to like the videos. The videos are important to be liked because if they're not liked, the algorithm that controls this platform is not going to share the videos with other people. And as a result of that, our community is not going to grow. It's not just important to watch the video, but it's also important to view, to put a like rather. Just hit the like button as soon as you begin to watch the video so that the videos can be spread, can be, you know, it can go across the line. Now, one of the things about the situation I am going to speak about today is I saw this article in the Jamaica Gleaner today, and that article is talking about a professor, and I think she's from the University of Technology, Professor Rosalea Hamilton, director of the Institute of Law and Economics. And she made a very bold statement in the Jamaica Observer or some meeting that was held in Kingston recently. But let me share my screen with you so we can look at what this professor is saying. And I'm happy that she had the gumption and the moral rectitude to, to say what she's saying. Because these things require a lot of courage and boldness. Because many of our intellectuals or so-called intellectuals in Jamaica are not saying these things. They're silent on issues like these. For whatever reason she was doing it. But let us say that this was, sincere. We've got to give her credit for being that bold, especially at a time when like this, when we hear from Nigel Clark and Andrew Holness that things are so rosy in Jamaica. And indeed, the economy is spurring along. It's moving along. It's moving forward. One of the things that amazes me, I must say, is that Andrew Holness, boldly made this pronouncement sometimes last week that as he travels the length and breadth of Jamaica, he sees frowns on people's faces. And he's wondering how he can transform their faces into smiling faces because of the buzzing economy, and that our economy is doing spectacularly well. And he doesn't know for what reason people have this sort of permanent frowns on their faces, something that is interesting. And I'm wondering, what is Andrew Holness thinking? What is the Prime Minister thinking? Does he think that he can fool the people and they're not intelligent to know whether they are being deceived and being gaslit? Right? I think that Andrew Holness needs to rethink that position, and he needs to apologize to the Jamaican people for making such a statement, because we do know the fact on the ground that things are not rosy. Things are not even rosy in wealthier countries, more so, in Jamaica, a very impoverished country, and a country that has been impoverished, forever. I don't know if there is a time in Jamaica's history, apart from slavery, and it was very wealthy during slavery. It was the crown jewel in the British colony. And there is something that I saw here that I should read to you about Jamaica. And this was actually a review that was done on the Confounding Island by the book that was written by Professor Orlando Patterson. And I'm not subscribed to this website, so I can't read to you most of what this guy is saying. But let us look at this excerpt here. It says here, if we could, we would fain forget Jamaica altogether, wrote dyspeptic Anthony Trollope on a visit to the island in 1859. The utter sinking of Jamaica under the sea might not be regarded as a misfortune, unquote. So this guy is saying, obviously a British planter, says that, because 1859 would be the end of slavery, because slavery ended in Jamaica there in the 1830s. So in 1859, because the planters are not getting the money that they used to get, he's saying that Jamaica no longer serves a purpose. That's what he was intimating. The fact that slavery had ended and he was no longer receiving all of that income, that wealth that the island generated, that, guess what? We would not miss that island if it should go under the sea. Now, this is how elites talk. And many of us are saying, oh, he's a white man, so he doesn't have any respect for the predominantly Black populace. Let me say something that our politicians and our economic elites in Jamaica have replaced these former colonial and slave masters, right? And they're occupying those seats. And they likewise don't care about the masses of people on the island. At the start of his journey, Trollope lamented the island's fall from grace from olden times when nobody anywhere was so rich as a Jamaican planter. So having used the Jamaican, plantation, right, and the Jamaican slaves, he thinks that, he would not miss the island if the island were to have been totally or completely destroyed, right? This is how these youth behave. So they use you and they spit you out of their mouths. And our politicians do the same too. They use you guys and they ask you for your votes. And after they've left office, they don't remember you, right? Even when they're in office, they don't care about you after you have cast your votes for them, right? Because their major quest is power, right? Their major quest is power and to remain in power. And after they've achieved that, that's the end of the game, right? And that is what Jamaicans have to understand. Now, Professor Orlando Patterson, as you know, wrote a book, the Confusing Island, the Confounding rather Island. Now, among the questions this reviewer is saying he poses and seeks to answer is whether it's a good policies or good institutions that influence development. Now, I think what Professor Orlando Patterson was trying to understand, and perhaps is still trying to understand, is whether or not good policies or good institutions, result in the successive or the effective development of a nation. And I think he argues that it's good institutions. I think it should be both. We should have good institutions, effective institutions, and we should also have efficacious policies that we implement. I think both are important if we're going to have a successful nation, which we have not had. I think that we as a nation have failed, right? And nothing is wrong if we say that we have failed, right? People fail. But we have to admit that reality. We have to come to grips with that reality and look for solutions to see how we can become or attain that sort of prosperity that we have long sought after, right? That is what we need to do. But I think we need to look at the root cause or the root causes of our failure. And I think that Professor Orlando Patterson, I think that's exactly what he wanted to say, but did not say it in so many words. The confounding island is supposed to mean the island that has failed, right? The island that has failed. But we will look a little bit more in depth at Professor Orlando Patterson's work, particularly as it relates to the comparison between Jamaica and Barbados, and where he asked, why has Barbados prospered? And why have they been able to develop their country while Jamaica has not? Now, for those of you who are living on the island, let me pose this question to you, because sometimes you tend not to want to think, and you tend not to want to accept the reality. Can you remember, particularly those of you who are in my age group, we call ourselves Generation X, is it Generation X? my age group, and those who are the baby boomers, right? The baby boomers came before Generation X, I believe. Can you remember, a decade, or let us say a period of 5 years in which we could say that Jamaica experienced prosperity, right? Even a period of 5 years, 3 years, 4 years. Just try to digest that sort of question and see if you can answer in the affirmative or it's a negative response. I am not sure. I'm not going to answer that for you, right? Now, sometimes I ask people, they would tell me that, yeah, we're moving on and things have improved. And you'd ask them, let's look at the three basic necessities of human existence, right? We talk about food, shelter, and clothing. Now, when we look at other amenities and other important elements and important necessities that we need, like water, tell me one basic thing that you can say since 1962, after Jamaica's independence, after Jamaica's political independence, that really has improved in terms of whether it be water, housing, education, healthcare, agriculture, right? Tell me one thing that we can say that has improved. One thing, one area. And I'm not saying it has to be an A, but we can give it a solid B+. That particular amenity, that particular necessity has improved significantly, right? Our economy, we know, has not improved. And if there is an improvement, it's not for the masses, it's for the minority. And it's time for us to come to grips with that also, that our economic development has not been it's not inclusive. It has not been inclusive. It has been exclusive. So we're not suggesting now that you might not have developments here and there, but it is not geared towards improving the lives of the masses of people in Jamaica. And that is why we are chronically impoverished. There's chronic poverty on the island. And not only are Jamaicans realizing that, but foreigners are also recognizing the levels of chronic poverty that is so evident in the land of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. But let's go back to what this Professor Rosalea is saying. Economic specialist Professor Rosalea Hamilton, or is it Rosalea or Rosalia, says there are questions to be answered about whether Jamaica's positive macroeconomic performance is facilitating the development of the country, pointing to a labor force where 70% are uneducated, right? 70% of the labor force she's alluding or asserting, right, are uneducated. Hamilton, the director of the Institute of Law and Economics at the University of Technology, said there are positives in terms of the trend in the reduction of the debt to GDP ratio. And there might be some. I don't think there is. I think the debt is going up. I think that they have been paying interest on the debt, but I don't think that our debt has been significantly reduced as according to their stats. Now, what they show, it seems so, that it has been, but we're going to realize very shortly that it is not so. Because these people are, they are master deceivers. And that is what we have to understand. They're not here to tell you the truth. They are here to enlarge their pockets. But in every one of these variables, we can ask, how is it facilitating development? The development of the people of Jamaica, the institutions of Jamaica, the communities of Jamaica. That's the issue. And as I would say, that's the question, Hamilton told the Gleaner yesterday. Her comments followed on Advocates Network post-budget governance press conference held yesterday at the Spanish Court Hotel in New Kingston. The professor said successive governments had gone on record about the macroeconomic fundamentals being correct. And that's all they talk about ad nauseum, these macroeconomic fundamentals. But they're not talking about the reduction of poverty in Jamaica. They're not talking about the fact that our dollar is worthless, right? And that people cannot even afford the basic necessities of life, thanks to our diaspora or generous diaspora, who are trying as much as they can to help, to lend a helping hand to their families on the island. But had it not been for them, Jamaica would have been a disaster, right? A disaster, complete disaster, because we have not been expanding the wealth. And as a result of that, the economy is not being expanded. Still, she said Jamaicans are waiting to see the developmental outcomes, which are not happening. It's obvious. You go down there and all you're seeing are some of these high-rise buildings, but these are not for Jamaicans, right? These are foreigners who are there and they're bilking all of the profits and stealing, as it were, our resources. In February, Prime Minister Andrew Holness said his administration was facing a real conundrum of turning frowns into smiles, even as it presided over a strong economic policy that has pulled Jamaica back from the brink of bankruptcy. This is what the Prime Minister of Jamaica is saying. And you really wonder what is in the mind, what is in the brain of Prime Minister Andrew Holness. I do really wonder sometimes when I see him running around the world as if he's important, right? And leaving behind the large masses impoverished. We are not seeing any great development on the island. We are not seeing any levels of real development on the island. Noting at the time a record low unemployment rate, creating 150,000 new jobs since 2016, and improved credit rating of BB minus, 10 consecutive quarters of economic growth, a balance of payments current account surplus of $352 million US dollars, and a near 74% debt to GDP ratio. Holness said getting inflation within the targeted band of 4 to 6% will be the linchpin between a solid economy and Jamaicans benefiting from it. It has nothing. To Jamaicans, this means absolutely nothing. They have to see it, Andrew Holness. They must see it in their day-to-day life, and they are not seeing it, Mr. Prime Minister. You have to wheel and come again, because what you're saying is just mumbo jumbo, right? And you've got to express this in clearer language and in more transparency, letting the Jamaicans know what is going to happen in the next year or the next 2 to 3 years. Because certainly this means absolutely nothing. It means a lot, perhaps, to the Jamaican elites and to the elites in Washington, D.C., but it does not mean anything to the average man on the Jamaican streets, right? And it's time for us to understand that. He said there is a sense that his government has done well in terms of its economic policy, but translating the positive statistics into smiles is the bottom line. You can't translate statistics into smiles because it must bear aspects of the reality, right? Don't tell me about a reduction in crime when I see lots of people around me dying. It means absolutely nothing to me, right? That stats or that statistics mean absolutely nothing if I do not see around me significant reduction in crime and violence. So this guy, he's sitting at home, eating well, having his helpers and being taken care of in the best way that anybody would like. And he doesn't care about what happens to the average Jamaican. Hamilton said Jamaicans must ask themselves whether these are the correct indicators that ought to be measured and monitored to achieve desired outcomes. And that is where our democracy falters. We tend to say that democracy only stops at voting and the speeches, the boring speeches that they make in Gordon House. But I dare say that they need to explain more thoroughly and let us know really what is the IMF's agenda. What is really their agenda? What do they want from us? We know that they have already built the IMF, not the IMF, the NHT, the National Housing Trust, of billions of dollars. The IMF did that through the back door. How can we trust someone who has done something like that when they know that those funds should not have been touched? And we have been with the IMF for over 10 years now, and we have not seen any real development. We have not yet been the success story that they say that we are, right? We need to see more buildings. We need to see more hospitals. We need to see not just 5 hospitals. We need to see more 10, 15 hospitals going up. Modern hospitals and schools. Hundreds of schools need to be built, right? At least 100 should be built in the next 5 years. We need to see these things because we have long waited and we have made a lot of, what should I say now, sacrifices. The IMF has stolen enough, and it's time for Jamaican people to say enough is enough. She said a legitimate question was whether policymakers should be tracking GDP per capita and monitoring this annually as an indicator of the living standards of the average Jamaican. What we need to know, Professor Rosalea Hamilton, is what is the Memorandum of Understanding, the MOE, as far as the IMF policies are concerned, or the IMF agreement is concerned. We have not yet learned about that agreement. And it seems to be that we're still with the IMF. Obviously, that's why they're trying to get the GDP ratio to 74% or 6. I understand it's going to be going down to 60%. That is the goal, to allow it to go. And then afterwards, I'm not sure, it's probably going down to 40, who to tell, or to 0, right? Because what is happening with the IMF in Jamaica is something that is really exploitative, and our pseudo-intellectuals in Jamaica sit there and they say nothing, living in that culture of silence and allowing the IMF to treat our people like slaves. She said this could be used to measure whether all the other macro fundamentals were leading to the outcomes that Jamaicans want. The IMF is not an institution that is going to lead to prosperity. It is not. Doesn't have any success story out there, right? So why should we think that after all of these sacrifices, economic sacrifices that we've been asked to make, that we are going to suddenly be this success story that the IMF desires? The IMF doesn't want any success story, by the way. They're just willing to suck the economic lifeblood out of any economy that they're allowed to do so. I mean, I think they have sucked enough blood, don't you think so? And they have swindled a lot of our monies from us, and we need to stop it. We need to say enough is enough. Now, it begs the question of whether the indicators that we are looking at are sufficient. I think we have to appreciate that when we talk about economic development, we're talking about several indicators. It's a multidimensional idea of development, said Hamilton, which is true, right? You have to talk about your hospital, your healthcare, your education, right? You have to talk about the facilities that we have not yet built, another dam. We need other water infrastructure. Where is the water infrastructure? People are crying out that they don't have water in 2024 in modern Jamaica. Because all that makes us modern are some few highways and some cell phones and man have enough gal. That's all that make us modern. We are as backward as you can get it. Now, she said this could not simply be only about economic growth, but also human and social development, as well as political governance indicators. And this is correct. She is 100% correct. And it's time for Nigel Clarks and the Andrew Holness to get their act together, because they can't just be running around like slaves and house slaves and just doing the bidding of the IMF and these multilateral organizations. And if they're not, then Mr. Clark, I would expect you to develop the country, because you're going to come and tell us that, no, the IMF gives us all of this leeway. Is that so? And if they're giving you the leeway that we're talking about, then I need to see funds being invested in the development of Jamaica and its infrastructure and its people, not only roads and highways, right? And developing of smart cities. And first of all, we need more schools in Jamaica right now. We don't need to talk about smart cities. We need to talk about schools, development of our people. And we need many more schools in Jamaica right now, right? Because we have not built enough. And we have the class sizes are too large. The teacher-pupil ratio is too big, right? It's too wide a gap. We need to lower that gap and do so as quickly as possible. We have lost at least 2 generations, and we need to come back, and we need to understand that if we lose another generation, that's the end of Jamaica, right? Because it seems to me that's what's happening in Haiti right now. They've lost so many generations that they have descended into chaos, right? And we do not want that to happen to us. But the writing is on the wall if we do not get our act together immediately. Not tomorrow, but right now. Ahora mismo, as they say in Spanish. We need to get our acts together. Agora mesmo, as they say in Portuguese. Now, she said a pooling of what would ultimately trigger what Jamaicans have been looking for. Hamilton said, in discussing Jamaica's sustainable development goals, there were several indicators, but the country must find the clutch of indicators that make sense of its historical, social, and economic journey, which is true. We are, for example, maintaining a labor force that is undereducated. Nearly 70% of our labor force have passed no exams or have not passed the required thresholds. I think we also need to revamp some of those exams and create practical exams designed to make our people intelligent. Some of these exams are just not, they're just exams that require, people to regurgitate what they have learned. But we need to set more thinking exams, right? And allow it also to reflect the realities of the job that the person is seeking to have. For example, in the teaching of, all of these subjects that people have to do, why do we need to have all those subjects? People are coming with, leaving school with 16 subjects. For what purpose? Why don't we just have 5 or 6 major subjects, probably 5 for the ordinary student, something like civics, a curriculum, English language, literature, a science subject, and a foreign language. And that counts. And right throughout, from grade 7 to grade 11 or 12, whatever they have there now, they should be, constantly, trained in these subjects from grade 7 to 12, right? And if you do that, indoctrinating them into these subjects, you're going to see that history is important, right? So history is very important for them to study, right? So we might want to have that. English could be merged with literature, that language and literature together, right? And we could have history, and then we have something, history or geography. The student could have a choice whether they want to do. I think history should be required. and particularly the history of Jamaica. So you might want to have the history of Jamaica and world history should be required right throughout high school. They should graduate from high school with a thorough understanding of the history of Jamaica and the world, particularly other parts of the Caribbean and the United States, because the United States is the reigning superpower and empire of the world. And Jamaicans ought to understand the relationship, historic and the present relationship that we have with the US. Sometimes, we tend to be confused with that relationship. And Jamaicans don't understand the relationship apart from what they learn in the media about our relationship with the United States, right? And we need to understand that relationship might not be as friendly as you think it is. Now, so let's look at the director said if Jamaica wants to become competitive in a global economy, there is innovation and high-level thinking. The education level of the labor force must be shifted to that of globally competitive countries. If you look at the data in terms of those of us with degrees, we're talking about 14%. But if you look at a comparable figure in Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development countries, it is closer to 40%. And she's not even talking about the fact that, even though we might have 14% of graduates from tertiary institutions, but a lot of them are also leaving. 80% of them leave every year. So that even compounds the problem that we have in Jamaica, right? So unless the government can attract highly skilled, highly educated people in Jamaica, I do not think we need to talk about debt reduction, because it means absolutely nothing when most of our human resources would have left Jamaica. And then we are just going to be left with a predominantly illiterate and semi-literate people. Now, how are we going to move forward? Let us even say that what the IMF is trying to do was in our best interest. How would we move forward with a predominantly semi-literate and illiterate population? These are some of the questions we need to ask ourselves. It's not going to work, because if we're going to move forward, we need to have an intelligent populace, right? And we need to move away from this culture of the peasants, right? Which is really a ghetto culture, really, where we're promoting this ghetto lifestyle and this ghetto disposition. We need to become a softer, gentler society where we promote the virtues of education, because what we have there now, we are promoting and we're lauding people who can't speak proper, people, and don't tell me about this African and that nonsense, because it's not going to get us anywhere, right? It's not going to get us anywhere. And nobody's going to be sympathetic to Jamaica when they go to Wall Street or they go to New York or wherever they go to. They are not going to be sympathetic with them if they're not able to speak the language of the colonial masters. We are not in a situation where we control our destiny, right? If we were in a situation in which we controlled our destiny and we were, sovereign and independent as we say we are, which we are not, then we could talk about the Creole land. Yeah, we control things in our area, right? In our neck of the woods, right? However, we don't control anything in this globalized economy. We are like slaves. So yes, we have to speak the language of the colonial master, right? And our colonial master right now is the United States of America, right? She runs the show and her lingua franca is English, right? So we've got to be able to be competent at speaking English and stop talking about Africa, because Africa has nothing to do with Jamaica right now. Africa can't help us. In fact, years ago, we used to send missionaries to Africa to help African countries, right, to lift themselves out of that system of poverty and entrenched backwardness because of years of exploitation by the Europeans, right? So we were sent there to help to lift their standard. And now we're crying for Mama Africa, even though we don't even know what Africa has to offer us. What does Africa have to offer us right now? You tell me, in terms of building our economy. Hmm? So why are we crying after Africa when we know that yes, we should love her because that is where most of our foreparents came from, or forefathers, right? Came from Africa, and we should preserve the Creole and preserve our folk culture, but we can't allow the folk culture to receive this dominance, right? And lord her over what should be a much more intellectual and refined culture. And there was no refinement on the plantation, right? The plantation was as raw as you could get it because we were illiterate. We were illiterate on the plantation, and we are still, for the most part, without shackles on the plantation, because as she's suggesting here, as Professor Hamilton is suggesting, we have what? 70% of our population in the labor force undereducated. Many of them might not be able to read fluently. And remember now that I also read excerpts from the Patterson report, and it also suggested that our education system is or has been a failure, except for a few pockets of excellence here or there. And those pockets of excellence have been there since we were under British colonialism, because it was there to maintain the status quo. And not much has changed since we changed the guards of leadership in 1962. Not much has really changed, even though we like to think that that is so. We like to think that that is so. In fact, I think we are regressing, because when you look even at our traditional high schools, we're not doing as well as we used to do, or they're not doing as well as they used to do, because again, the glorification of this folk culture has even taken over traditional high schools, where children are not as refined as they used to be. They don't have the command of English as they used to have back in the days, right? So we've got to get back to a culture where we think, yes, we can have and preserve aspects of our folk culture, but we need to move towards the glorification. And let me not use the word the glorification, but putting on a higher pedestal our mainstream culture, right? Which is an educated, or which should be an educated, refined, you know, culture. Not something that is giving a lot of, or paying a lot of attention to some dancehall music, because really and truly we are now a dancehall culture. And that culture, we talk about dancehall music, especially since the 1990s, then we know that that is not a positive subject. It's not a topic that is going to inspire us. And don't tell me about the people in Japan, as I heard Donna Hope, who's a professor at the University of the West Indies, promoting her books on, I think it was CVM TV, about the dancehall culture and how people respect us because of our dancehall culture. And they, are enamored over us, right? Because of a dancehall culture. Who really is going to be running after Jamaicans, right? Because of a dancehall culture. Nonsense, right? Nonsense. And it's interesting to note how these people devote, and they have dedicated so much time into research about a dancehall culture. What is happening at the University of the West Indies? What is happening at the University of the West Indies? Are you guys proving yourself, as Monty Perkins suggested, that you are an intellectual ghetto? Because why would you spend so much time? She was showcasing all the books that she has written on the dancehall culture, right? And I'm not suggesting that she can't write a book about the dancehall culture in Jamaica. But why all these books? Why not look at also, in her interview, she never mentioned any negative characteristics of the dancehall culture on Jamaica's mainstream culture and our lack of civility that we see there, the crude, crass, coarse, indisciplined society that we see masquerading in Jamaica, and of which people are extremely proud. They love that chaos, and they love the way they speak, and they love the illiteracy and the ignorance that they exude in the land of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, right? The land of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, who came also from the bowels of the working class, but he recognized that it's important for him to speak English and to master the language of the colonial and the slave masters, and to use it to even confuse them, to tie their tongues up, and to let them know that he can master English even more than they are able to do. Right? Because the language it can only be a tool of control if you have not mastered it. But if you try to master it, which we should try to master it, to let them know. And there's nothing more beautiful than when you listen to the mainstream Jamaican accent. Nothing more musical and nothing more soothing to the human ear as when you hear that beautiful Jamaican standard English coming from people who are educated. Beautiful to listen to. And I used to speak to a Trinidadian colleague that I had at Howard University when I was there in the language of the Romance language department. And he always tells me, yes, Andrew, I love the Jamaican accent, but I prefer the mainstream Jamaican accent. Right? That's what he told me. I prefer the mainstream Jamaican accent. Beautiful when you listen to people who have mastered standard Jamaican English. Now, why are we now glorifying the Creole? Why would we want to go back to the plantation and to remain there? And one of the things, I was talking to a friend of mine recently, and I was sharing with him the fact that even in the Jamaican Creole, we find Jamaicans having a difficult time or a difficult experience to express explicitly, clearly what they would like to communicate, even in the Jamaican Creole. That we have not mastered any language then, if we cannot express clearly our problems or something that we would like to communicate. And that is why we're having a frustrated society in which people don't even know how to express themselves, neither in the Creole nor in standard English. Now, you tell me, what sort of society are we nourishing when we get to a level that people do not master the Creole? They can't express themselves. If they have a problem, they can't be able to express it intelligently in the Creole, because many of them can't. And that is why they become very frustrated, and they resort to killing. They resort to violence, right? These are some of the psychological, effects of glorifying this ghetto culture that we need to look at, right? Because there was once a time, even among people who emerged from the bowels of the working class, who spoke a certain way. They might not have gone to high school. Many of them did not go to high school, but because they respected mainstream culture, that was the culture that they saw where there was some refinement. And you would hear the Jamaican parents saying to their children, those who had the privilege of going to high school, you can't speak that way because you're going to Westwood, or you're going to St. Hilda's, you're going to Wilmer's, you're going to The Monroes, you're going to your castle. How can you speak that way? Right? Parents who never had an education, many of whom could not read, right? But they lauded the virtues of having an education. Look at Ben Carson. Ben Carson, whose mother was not able to read. She was illiterate, but she also recognized the virtues of having a good education. And an education means also that you can use English because that is a language, that is a tool of knowledge where you have lots of books written, right? A whole um, body of knowledge is preserved in that language. So how could we be encouraging? We don't have the resources right now, people. Let not these people fool you to be having bilingual education. We don't have that sort of money to do so. What we need to do is encourage our citizens to speak English. And we need to have also the radio announcers going back to where they spoke English, and also people on the television stations. We just have to go back to a culture in which we really appreciated more and embraced a refiner aspect of culture, right? We can't continue to be so rough and gruff and crude and coarse. And do you know that there are Jamaicans who out there who do know how to speak English and they refuse to do it because in their minds, in their narrow minds, they think that they're Jamaicans. And to be Jamaican means that you need to express yourself in the Creole, right? That is what makes you Jamaican. Because if you express yourself in standard English, it means therefore that you're giving up your Jamaicanness, your Jamaican identity. Another thing is that you need to speak Creole if you're, if you want to exude that you are humble. Because how can you be humble and express yourself in standard English? That is rubbish. And I'm not suggesting now that you can't, if somebody's not understanding what you're saying in standard English, that you cannot try to help the person to understand and to lift them up, not to go down there and remain in ignorance with them, but help them, help your brother, your sister to climb the ladder of success, right? So they too can be able to have some upward social mobility. Because English, whether we like it or not, is one of the tools, particularly in Jamaica, of upward social mobility. Right? So these are some of the things I'm looking at. And I'm saying that we need to look at, as Professor Hamilton was suggesting, development as a whole, and not just look at development in terms of just building some highways, having some phones, man have enough gal, and also, just talking about the debt to GDP ratio and lowering our debt, and that's all. Oh, we're going to be developed afterwards. Everything's going to be great, right? If we understood since 2013, and because of the rigid IMF agreement in which we had to be engaged, if we understood the level of economic backwardness, the level of socioeconomic backwardness on the island, we would begin to tell the IMF, enough, enough. You've had enough blood. Get out immediately of our country. Get out immediately, out of our country. Fuera, right? Get out, because we understand that we have regressed. How many years? I don't know. People, if they are honest enough, will do that research to know that we have regressed, because that IMF agreement was ridiculous. It was absurd, and they did not have to engage us in such a stringent, right, and rigid economic program, right? It was not good for us, and it has not helped us to move along. And we can look at the large numbers of Jamaicans leaving every year, right? In every field of um, of work, right? Of specialization, right? Be it in languages, in math and the sciences, engineers, lawyers, people are just leaving Jamaica. Politicians too. In some cases, we have politicians leaving. Not as frequently because they have access to money and they can maneuver, themselves in that country, right? But we have lots of other people in different specializations, different areas of specialization, moving and going to countries like Canada, to the United States, and to England, among other countries, also to Japan, right? Or also to Japan. So we've got to come together and assess where we are at this moment. Is the IMF still in Jamaica? Why is it still there? And why is it insisting that we have to go, to reduce our GDP to 50% or whatever they want? We still don't know. What does the IMF want from Jamaica? I think Jamaicans need to press our prime minister about that, the JLP administration. What do they want from us? We have given them enough milk. We have given them enough blood. We don't have more to give them. They need to leave and go and wreak that havoc. Whatever country will allow them to do it. It seems to me that only Jamaica and Jamaicans allow them to play that sort of game. Other countries would not have accepted the sort of draconic economic agreement and policies that we agreed to implement when we inked out an agreement with them in 2013. Now, this is what I have to say. I'm not sure, but the situation in Jamaica needs to be highlighted, and something needs to be done immediately, or we are going to find ourselves in a similar situation that Haiti now finds itself in. Remember now the Global Fragility Act. I did present a video on that. You need to go and do your own research on the Global Fragility Act, and you'll see that the US has a lot of pretexts in which it can invade any country that it deems a threat to US national security. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you'll join me in another video. Remember now to like and to share and to subscribe and to leave a thoughtful comment at the end of the video. See you then. All the best to you. Bye.